Alyson Meister. I am a Canadian and I'm a professor here of organizational behavior and leadership at Universidad de los Andes. I started in April, so I've been here, I think, 10 months now. So I have a PhD from Melbourne Business School in Australia. But before that, I lived in China, in Switzerland, in Canada, and then I briefly lived in Chile, and now we're based here in Bogota. The organizational behavior is the study of people in organizations. And why it's important is because if you've ever had a job, you realize that your work life is super important because it has impacts on your overall life happiness, your stress, your well-being. It can have serious implications for you as a person and also for other people. And your behavior can impact everyone around you, but it can also impact yourself and your organization, which ends up cascading through to society. So organizational behavior, and what I look at more the micro side, is how we as people can influence all those different types of outcomes, from your own outcomes through to team outcomes, organization outcomes, and then society, the societal outcomes. So that's kind of the general overview of OB. I think the most important areas of OB, well, if you kind of break it down into the topics that we study, are things like human motivation. We look at perception and decision making. We look at effective teams and how to create effective teams. We look at diversity. So how to capitalize on differences between people, so people get along better, so they perform better, so they like their jobs better, so they have better well-being, and also to minimize the downsides of diversity. What else do we look at? Let me see. We look at, on an interpersonal level, things like relationships, how to develop relationships with people, how to influence people, what the impact of power and politics has on people and relationships and organizational groups. We look at negotiation, around how to negotiate successfully, how differences between diverse types of people have different outcomes. Me personally, my PhD, I look around interpersonal perception. So and things like, for example, what is called meta-perception. So how my thoughts of what you're thinking impact my behavior. So all of those kind of things are what OB kind of looks at. All with the kind of end goal of making people happier in their jobs and more productive, and therefore the organization happier and productive. Leadership for me is the capacity to influence others towards a goal, right? So the leadership is an individual's abilities to achieve something, and every organization, every team, every relationship, every informal and formal has leaders. Unfortunately, sometimes we don't even know we're being led, but leadership happens informally and it happens formally. So there's leader as a position, and then there's leadership as a set of capabilities. And so for me, I like to look at leadership as a set of capabilities that we can develop. So we can develop the ability to help other people achieve their goals and to motivate people to achieve their goals and to pull on all those levers in OB that we have, like understanding personality, understanding diversity, understanding how people work in teams, and understanding your own motivations and your own strengths and weaknesses in trying to achieve a goal. So leadership for me I think underpins, is not just a topic of OB, but it underpins all of the classes I teach. Because, so for example, we talked about ethical decision making today. And you face ethical decisions almost every day of your life, from small through to large. And as a leader, you can change people's lives by making a right or wrong decision. So I think leadership is critical for me. That's why I study it. Well, it depends on, I guess, in any kind of relationship where you want to have influence on outcomes, it depends on how you define manipulation, right? There's like manipulation for good or or influence, right? So I tend to look at leadership, and what we try to teach here is leadership that's ethical and that's responsible. So if you're going to develop people who are ethical and responsible, it's about influencing in a way that has benefits for both the employee and the
company, the organization.
Yeah, and that's why we kind of look at it as sustainable and ethical, or responsible and ethical, and because responsible includes things like making decisions that don't destroy human well-being, or that don't destroy the environment. So I think, there are some leaders who will use manipulation, and they would not be examples of positive leadership for me. For example, Donald Trump, he would be an example of really leadership by, so if you look at motivation theories, right, back in the theory side, there's motivation by kind of that negative consequence, and then there's motivation through, there's the stick and the stick and the carrot, right? You can either threaten people to do what you want, or you can, coercion, or you can influence in a positive way to kind of get, and one of the ways to do that is through mutual benefits.
Isn't that very Pavlov?
Yeah, that's very common. That's like we can go back to those original theories. But yeah, so there's a lot of different theories on motivation. And I guess the whole field really did start with Mayo and Taylor, and so if you look at that, basically these guys, because OB it is a field of study now, but OB is kind of a conglomeration of a number of different fields. So you have engineering, so you've got math, you've got psychology, you've got sociology, you've got, what else? They all kind of combine to make OB, because OB is applying all of these. So I like to think of it as a more applied discipline, because you're applying it to the study of people at work, because work is a huge context in our lives. So you've got Taylor and Mayo, and they're kind of like on the two sides of a coin, because Taylor was like the more trying to mechanize people. So he wanted to take the human out of behavior and say, okay, how do we make logical, rational, predictable decisions, and how do we influence people to do what we want in a very logical, fashionable way? So kind of making humans like machines, trying to understand humans like that. And you've got Mayo, who kind of brought the human relations side to it, who said, okay, humans aren't machines, there's other things we can do, relational things we can do. Like, he looked more at the need side of behavior and said, okay, people want to be part of groups. And so he kind of started the movement around human relations side, saying, okay, wait, humans, we might get better outcomes from them if we treat them as humans, not as machines, and actually look at what influences humans, so the basic needs. And from there, those original thinking around making people happier and more productive at work by manipulating things like the environment, like those external things, started that kind of study of OE. And now all of those different factors that they looked at have almost branched into their own streams of research. So job satisfaction is one stream, motivation is one stream, perception and decision making, personality, all of these things are different individual differences that kind of lead to these kind of outcomes that they were looking at. And that's why it's hard, because the field has moved from just a couple of people doing all of these things to really specialized people focusing now on perception or on motivation, all for the same kind of goal, however, which is to make people happier and make organizations more productive. Well, there's a lot of differences with respect to the stereotypes people have about women and men and what they're supposed to be in leadership. That's one of the biggest challenges. You find that in studies that look at effectiveness of leadership, there's no differences between men and women. There's more differences in style. So women might be more relational in general than men, for example. But where the big difference lies is around the stereotype and how they're perceived as leaders and how they're punished for being leaders in general. So it's called role congruity theory, which says that women, basically, there's a stereotype that women shouldn't be leaders, that women are soft and kind and motherly, and men are strong and powerful, and they're the heroes. So when women enter into leadership roles and start acting in a way that doesn't fit the stereotype that society would expect, then they're punished for it in terms of their evaluations, in terms of how people see them and how people rate them. So they could perform just as well, but they're rated poorly because they're doing things outside of that stereotype society would have about women.
So the thinking is just different. The way they
The way
perceive.
society perceives them.
Society, all of society, there's no difference between America, there's no
No, I would say it's even stronger here. You know, the societal
Really?
expectations for women versus men are interesting. You know, Colombia is interesting in that way because there are very ingrained expectations for women and men. You know, that go down to deep historical, religious roots. You know, around women being at home and however, I think women here have a very high rate compared to other Latin American countries in leadership. So women are doing better here than in Chile, for example, in terms of leadership. So I don't know the reasons for that, but Connie does. That's what she studies. So
Well, that's good.
I think there's still at least a 30% pay gap between men and women here for the same job. And the percentage of women on boards and women in senior positions is very, very low. So there's a lot of work to be done, but I think that Colombia is better than certain other Latin American cultures in terms of women working, which is good to know. So it's interesting, that question about leadership qualities, because a lot of people want to make leadership about the personal traits of the actual person, but it's almost more skills that leaders need to have, like skills and behaviors. So I think things like I'm thinking because, for example, leadership theory goes into trait theories, behavioral theories, so I think that leaders need one of the most important things is they need to have empathy and compassion. But that's my. So if you look at successful leaders, most of them combine kind of empathy and compassion with astute ability to make decisions and to influence people to follow them. So you can take like charisma, for example, is something that's highly debated in leadership because people follow charismatic leaders. But charisma can be used for bad and good. Hitler was charismatic, Trump is charismatic, but so is Gandhi, so was Mandela. Yeah, exactly. So I think the ability to inspire people, the ability to motivate people, the ability to connect with other people is, for me, something leaders should have.